So moving on to the next part of this costume process, we have the soft parts of this entire outfit. And with the soft parts, I'm mainly focusing on the flight suit and also the waistband. This entire flight suit was very fun to make because I have done a lot of sewing for other cosplay parts, but I haven't really made a complete entire suit, especially pants. I have never done pants before, so I had to be a little bit creative and work with things I already had at home to get the look that I'm going for, especially getting the right measurements and the shape that I'm going for, especially for the pants. I think it's just time for me to start showing you the process of how I made the flight suit and the other soft parts of this outfit. So the soft parts we are going to focus on in this video is only going to be the flight suit, the neck cover and the waistband, because the flak vest is going to be a big project and I feel that this video is going to be a very long video if I include the flak vest in this video. So I'm going to do that separately. I'm also going to focus on another piece of accessory in that video also, so I can make two projects in one in that video. I made the flight suit a two-piece set. I think they're supposed to be separate pieces, but I'm not sure. Sometimes when you're searching flight suits, Mandalorian, some are one piece and others are two pieces. I think the Boba Fett flight suit is one piece, but I think it's all about personal preference and what you find might be easier way when you're dressing up as the Mandalorian. I made these a two-part set because that's the easiest way to get dressed, for me anyways. So I have the shirt and I have the pants. I wasn't really searching for any kind of patterns for the flight suit. Most of all, I was just researching a lot of pictures just to see what this style looks like and also see some inspirations on what the flight suit could look like without the armor on top of it, because there are details that you can see. And then from there just try to figure something out and make my own design and patterns that looked most accurate to what I could see from the show or other promo pictures and so on and so forth. And I wanted to make sure that I used patterns that I knew were going to be working for my measurements. This fabric that this flight suit is made of is not stretchy fabric. It's just cotton twill, so it's not having any stretch in it. Mainly, I knew that I needed to know that the pants were going to work. So I was thinking about what do I have at home that could work as reference when I'm starting to create these patterns. So, move these aside. I have these jeans and this t-shirt, which were perfect for the style that I was going for. These are denim jeans, they have no stretch in them. These were perfect shape and perfect length, and the fact that they are not stretch. I used these as a guide, mainly the overall shape of the legs and the waist. Then when it comes to the flight suit, it's a very special design. It has the style of a regular t-shirt, it goes like here, but then it also has a second sleeve that goes underneath it. So I knew that I needed a design that was like a t-shirt that had oversized sleeves and was a little bit more of a box style t-shirt. And thankfully I had a t-shirt at home that's like a oversized crop box tee. The perfect thing about these sleeves is the fact that the sleeves are oversized, so the circumference around is much larger, meaning that it can actually fit a second sleeve underneath, and that was the style I was going for. That was going to be perfect. So I was using this one as a guide when I was working on the upper piece of the flight suit. But I'm going to make patterns for these that are going to be a helpful guide, just so you get an idea of what the style of each part is going to be, and then you can work with your measurements from there. The first thing we're going to talk about with the soft parts are going to be the easiest part of all of these, because it's just one shape, just a few stitches, and that's pretty much it. So the waistband is just a straight, longer rectangular piece of fabric. The width of this waistband basically is going to go a little bit over your hips and then all the way up to your chest, so underneath your chest. And then the length of the waistband is going to be enough length so it goes around your waist and also be able to attach it to the back. It all depends on what kind of attachments you want. If it's going to be just a regular zipper, then you don't have to think about adding anything extra to this. But if you're going to use like Velcro, you might have to make this waistband a little bit longer so they can overlap on the back. When you have actually figured out the width and the length, the first thing I did is actually I made sure that I made 2 sets of fabric so it would make the waistband a much stronger waistband and would feel like much better, stronger quality to the waistband. And I just placed the fabrics on top of each other, and then I added a simple straight stitch around 1/2 inch in, and on the edges of those parts so they wouldn't fray, I added just a simple zigzag stitch. Then I turned the waistband inside out, so the good side of the fabric was facing out. And then I decided to flatten the fabric using an iron, and then I added another straight stitch from the edges, 1/4 inch in, like 5 millimeter, all the way around the waistband. And then I had just a long piece of fabric now that was ready for adding some decor stitch for it. The decorative stitches here, they are divided into 5 parts, and it's going to be in total 4 rows of straight stitches on the waistband, and it all depends on the measurements for your size, depending on how wide you need the waistband to be. For my measurements, the space in between are like 3 centimeters, so I think it's like 1.5 inch in between each piece here. You just have to go after your measurement, see what the width is on your waistband, and then just divide it into 5 pieces so you can create 4 stitches, and then you know how wide you need each piece to be. I haven't actually added any kind of attachment to this waistband yet because I haven't really decided yet what I want. I was thinking of maybe using Velcro, but I think it's going to be a nicer finish if I just either use some kind of hooks and eyes or see if I can find a zipper at home, or I have to order zippers. It's not that big of an issue, it's just a small detail, but it's all about personal preference. It's not going to make that much of a difference. It's all about what you feel more comfortable with having when you are putting on your costume and what's the easiest way for you to get the soft parts on. So that's how you create the waistband. And then the next part was this upper part of the flight suit. Basically, the overall shape of this one, if you think about the outer sleeves and the torso part and the neck part, basically all of those details are pretty much the same style as the box tee that I have. The only difference I had to create is if you look at this shirt compared to the flight suit, since this is an oversized t-shirt, it means that the shoulders are a bit droopy. If you see on my shirt here, the shoulder part here is like over here, but my shoulders are up here. So you have to think about how long does the sleeve have to be and where is actually the shoulder piece supposed to start on the torso part of the shirt. So I had to work on that. So I used the actual sleeve as the guide for the measurements, but then I had to add some extra length and shorten the torso part so the shoulders would get higher up. I also made the torso a little bit longer so it would actually end on my hips, but this one is more like a crop top, so it ends a little bit higher. It's not really that much of a crop top, but it's definitely not the normal length of a regular t-shirt or a shirt. So the first part I was working on were the sleeves, and I wanted to make sure that I got the measurements correct. Obviously, the reason why I wanted to make sure that the measurements were correct was so I could get this detail here to look right, and it's supposed to be a length that when you're going to wear your pauldrons, it's only going to cover up this far. So the first thing I did is just cutting out the details for the outer sleeve, and you're going to see it in pattern what that's going to look like. The style of sleeves or the patterns of sleeves are very unique, like a bow shape, and then it goes out, and that's the parts that goes around your arm. But the parts that is like a valley style, that's the part that is going to be rounded on your shoulders, and you have to make sure that you have some extra piece of fabric so it actually can be attached to the middle part of the shirt, and that when you're sewing the pieces together that you have an extra part for the seams. Then I could start play around and add the decorative parts, which were the straight lines that are like, there are 3 straight stitches. Each stitch has the same width between each other, and I figured out that the stitch here was the exact same width as the space from this stitch to this other row of stitches. So when I had done that, then I could start figuring out how wide the other side was going to be and the last part. But all of these are going to be part of the patterns, obviously. When that was done, I saw that the front of the back of these sleeves, you can see here that it has a straight piece of fabric. There's like a long rectangular piece that is the same width as this decorative part here, but it's supposed to be an extra piece of fabric that is sewn onto the sleeve. So it's going to be here and there on the back side, and these are going to be sewn onto this piece before you're adding the lower part of the sleeve here. When that was done, it was time to actually figure out this part here. Pretty much what I could see on pictures, this is supposed to be an edge piece that you're folding over to the front and back, and it's the same width on the back as the front, and it has 2 stitches, one up and one down. So this entire part, it's all about how you want to attach them, but I can say that these flight suits, I don't know how much fabric glue I had used for these. It was a lifesaver to use the fabric adhesive or fabric glue, because then I wouldn't have to use that many needles, because I didn't want to create any kind of marks in the fabric. And the fabric glue was a perfect adhesive to actually make sure that the pieces stayed in place when I was actually going to go over with the sewing machine and add these stitches. That's exactly how I did with these parts. I first folded over the edges on the back side so they would get this nice edge here. I folded those over like as far in so I knew that the stitches would actually keep the edges in place. And I did the exact same thing on the edge part here, and this one is just a folded edge here, and it's like a wide long rectangle, so it goes all the way around the circumference of the outer sleeve and overlaps here. So you have to make some extra since it's going to overlap, but also some extra for the seams. And like I did with this part here, I first folded over the edges to get a nice finished look here, and just added a little bit of fabric glue when I folded over those edges so they would actually stick in place. And I did that folded edge here and on the back side to get a nice finish both on the inside and on the outside of the sleeve. I think I went over with an iron also just to flatten the fabric and make sure that I got the right measurements. And then I went over with a straight stitch on the upper and lower part of the edge here. And it also goes over this smaller piece of fabric here because it goes a little bit down here. So it's inside this part here and stays in place. So it stays here and there. So that's how the outer sleeve was done. And then we have the inner part of the sleeve that is going to be a long sleeve. The pattern of this one is the exact same. Up here it has this valley looking style, but the measurements of this one isn't as wide as the upper sleeve, so it would look like the outer sleeve is bigger. It actually starts to thin down up here until you get all the way down to your wrists. It's not supposed to be super tight, it's supposed to be a little bit loose, but you have to see what measurements you need for it to be fitting a little bit closer to your arm but not super tight, because you're supposed to be able to pull up your sleeve a little bit so it would get this folded effect on the fabric. So these parts, the seams here, are a little bit folded, but these patterns are going to help you a lot with the style of these. When I had figured out the width and length of the inner sleeve, I temporarily placed the outer sleeve on top of it because I hadn't sewn this part yet. It was still flat and open like that, so I could place the outer sleeve on top of the pattern that I had drawn on the fabric fabric which is going to be the inner sleeve, because then I could figure out how far down is actually these stitches going to start. You can actually see 5 stitches in a row. Maybe there are more, but I'm just focusing on what you can actually see. In the pictures that I could see, they were starting maybe like half an inch down from where the outer sleeve ends. And from there I added 5 more straight stitches in a row. And just to make sure that it has like a repeating pattern, repeating style that fits the other parts of the sleeve, I made sure that the space in between all these stitches are the exact same as the space in between the stitches on this decorative part. And that would make it much easier for me also to add these details. It looked correct to me, or it looks more accurate to the style I was going for. So for the wrist part of the inner sleeve, I made sure that the length was long enough so I could actually fold over the fabric at the end here and then add 2 rows of stitches like the style here, but instead of having a separate piece of fabric here that I folded over and added to the edge, I just folded the fabric as it is here. And also on the inside, before I folded over the fabric, I just made sure that I added a simple stitch to the edges of the fabric so it wouldn't start fraying too much and just stay in place. And I think I added a little bit of fabric glue when I folded this one, just to make sure that it stayed flat and in place when I went over with sewing machine. So that's how I created the outer and inner sleeve. And then it was time to actually attach these to each other. First of all, before I attached these together, I decided to make sure that these ones looked like tubes instead of just flat pieces of fabrics. To the outer sleeve, I had folded the edges here to get a nicer looking finish like I had done to other pieces. And then I added 2 straight seams to the parts where the edges of the sleeve overlaps. They would overlap like half an inch or 10 millimeter. To make it easier for myself, instead of having to do some measurements, I actually made sure that I looked at the width on the presser foot of my sewing machine, and once I had added 1 stitch, I could just place the fabric a little bit further out, so the edge of the presser foot was actually lining up with the stitch I had already added. And as soon as the needle hits the fabric, it hits a spot that is actually the perfect width between the first stitch and where the needle hits, so it would give me these 2 nice parallel stitches that are perfect space in between each other. So that's how I made the outer sleeve into a more tube-shaped sleeve style. On the inner sleeve, I just created this simple seam stitch, meaning I had it inside out, and I just added a stitch half an inch, 10 millimeters in where the seam is going to be to create the right measurements, and then I just added a simple zigzag stitch on the edges just to prevent it from fraying. So it's going to have this kind of look on it. Once these ones were turned inside out, I could start sewing these 2 sleeves together to each other. I haven't even made the torso part yet, I'm still just working on the sleeves, but I decided to sew these 2 sleeves together with a simple zigzag stitch. Then when that was done, it was just time to start working on the torso, or the middle part of this upper piece of the flight suit. So like I said, when I was working on the upper part of the flight suit and used this boxy t-shirt as the guide or as reference, I knew that I had to make sure that the shoulders were not as droopy as this shirt is. So I had first of all made the sleeves longer so the shoulder part would start higher up. When I had that in mind, I started to sketch out the neck piece of the shirt, and from there I could actually figure out the length of the parts that the shoulders are going to be in, like this part. Since I had this sleeve as a guide, I had to just look at the length here and compare to the length of the outer sleeve, and knew how much more I added to the outer sleeve, and then I knew how much I had to deduct from the length of the shoulder part of the t-shirt here when I was going to create the patterns, so that I knew that the shoulder part wasn't going to get too droopy. This one was very simple for me to create. When I did this one, I just had to go with the measurements of the length here and the width, and then just add a little bit of a curve until I got to the wider part that is on the under part of the sleeve, and then just create a straight boxy style of the rest of the part of the shirt that is going to have the waist and the hip measurements, but they are going to be a straight cut. It's not going to be figure sewn. This part was so easy to create because when I had made this part, when I created the back side, it was the exact same pattern, but the only difference is the fact that the back part is supposed to be a little bit higher. But this is obviously going to be part of the pattern, so you don't have to do any of these parts that I had to figure out myself. One thing that I think I did different than what's actually in the show or the original flight suit, I did this style on the actual pants, but I didn't know this style of seam when I was working on the shirt first. So I just, on this shirt, I just created 2 decorative seams here, or stitches, decorative stitches here on the front. Hey Alice. I created 2 stitches here also. They're just straight stitches, they are not attached to anything, so they're just decorative. But I think in the original flight suit, it's actually supposed to be that the back here and the side piece here are 2 separate pieces of fabric that you first add a straight stitch to on the back side, then you press those seams open with an iron, so you create this seam that goes around here, and then you create 2 stitches next to it. I have to look up what that kind of seam is called because I did that style actually on the pants, and I'm going to get into that later when I talk about the pants. So that means that this part of the shirt is actually supposed to be made up of 3 pieces here, this part here, and these 2 parts here. 1, 2, 3. And then they are supposed to be overlapping on the edges here with 2 straight stitches, just like the sleeves are attached here. When I made this shirt, I realized when I had everything else on top of it, like the waistband and the flak vest and then all the armor, you won't actually notice these 2 seams as much. They are just going to be a decorative part of this shirt now, so they're not going to be like a double pressed seam with 2 stitches on it. So it's just going to be 1 piece of fabric instead of 3 separate pieces. I'm going to make sure that the templates and patterns of this shirt is going to be these 3 separate pieces instead of 1 piece. In the pattern it would be more accurate, or at least I think it's supposed to look like that. So this one isn't really that much complicated. It's with the measurement, I just made sure that I added extra for the seam line here. On the neck piece I created 2 straight stitches, and then on the lower part of the shirt I just added 1 simple stitch. I folded over the fabric and then just added a simple stitch. After that I just sewed the front and back piece together where the overlapping seam here, meaning the edge of the back piece is actually folded over here, and then I had added 2 straight stitches to attach these ones together. And these straight stitches, when you're attaching the sleeves to the torso or the middle part of the shirt, these 2 straight stitches here, they're going to be edge to edge, so they look like they are a continuous seam or stitch that is going from the lower part of the shirt all the way up to the outer sleeves. So you have a little bit of a guide to know that you have everything in the right place. And then when that was done, make sure that I had some extra piece of fabric here so I could actually attach the torso with the arms. Then I made sure that the sleeves were inside out and also the shirt, so I could attach them edge to edge with each other. And then I just added a simple straight stitch to attach the torso and the sleeves together. Then I pressed open the edges of the seams here where the stitches, just to make sure they wouldn't get too bulky in here. So instead of being like this, I pressed them open just like that. And that made it much nicer when you have it on your shoulder. So if you can see here close up, I just have it pressed open. And I think I added a little bit of fabric glue just to make sure that the pressed edges would actually stick to the fabric they were pressed against instead of moving around. These sleeves doesn't have a double stitch here on the shoulder, so I just figured out that maybe I can just add a little bit of fabric glue to make sure that the pressed open seams would actually just stay in place. And that's how I made the upper part of the flight suit. In the end, when you have the patterns already made for you, it's not going to be that much to figure out. Here I had to figure out all the measurements and spacing and how to get the right style of the shirts and the sleeves and the torso and the back and all that. But the patterns and the templates are going to have all that figured out for you already, and how the decorative parts are going to look like and the decorative separate fabric pieces that are going to be attached to the sleeves and all that. And I'm going to make sure that you understand what I'm talking about when it comes to the fact that the front and back piece of the shirt are supposed to be made of 3 pieces instead of 1 whole piece here. And these are not supposed to be decorative seams, they're supposed to be a pressed seam that it has 2 stitches. But obviously if you don't want to go that route, you can make that simple 1 piece of fabric and add 2 decorative stitches on top of it, because that part isn't actually going to show up that much, so you're not going to notice if you have added just a decorative stitch instead of more of a pressed seam with 2 stitches.